Hello there, it's Carrie Rhodes here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and another card making video. Today I am playing with the brand new large die of the month from Spellbinders. It's the stitched card front, border, and flower die set. This creates panels and flowers that you can stitch. This is the largest panel right here, and I have cut it from waterfall cardstock from Spellbinders, and I'm using my tool-in-one to help release all of the fallout pieces, which there's probably like 1 million. All these teeny tiny circles that are cut into the paper so you can stitch this panel if you want to. So I'm using my tool-in-one, rubbing it over the die, and then I'll rub it over the paper as well. I find rubbing it over the die or the back of the paper when it's still in the die really helps release those little pieces. And then I can come back, use my tool-in-one again over the cardstock, whether it's the brush side or the paper piecing side, to get all of those out. And I can do the same thing to get the fallout pieces out of the die, because you don't want any of those pieces stuck in the die when you run this through another time. So that's a little bit of a job. I would pay my daughter to do that for me. I totally would. All right, here's the flower that comes in the set, and I am also using my tool-in-one for that. And then there's a leaf, so you can use those independently to add dimension or create a background. And there's also this border. It has 2 dies, so you can cut them all 3 together and create like a flower border piece that's cut out. You could die cut just one side of it so you had a bordered edge. You could die cut it repeatedly to create a background. There's so many choices. So here's all the dies and all of the pieces cut out and the embroidery floss that I'm going to use for stitching today. So you can see here all of the holes ready to go, but if you don't get them all poked out, you're going to stitch them, so you can always poke them out with your needle. I like to get as many of them out as I can. To stick down my thread, I used a glue dot. I don't recommend this because there's not a lot of space for a glue dot. So when I started stitching, I did get a little sticky residue on my needle that I had to rub off. So I'll talk to you about some other things I tried as we go along. But here I just went up through that center hole in this flower, and I am going to stitch around in a circle. So it is maybe not quite obvious when you first start stitching this, but there's a circle in the center of this flower, and you want to just use the center circle and then the little ring of circles right around it. There's some circles just beyond that, or holes I should say, just beyond that you would think you're supposed to incorporate into this, but you aren't. That is what you're going to use to stitch the petals. So I'm just going up one hole and then down through the center, up the next hole and down through the center, all the way around that inner circle on this flower. And there you can see it all finished right there. Yeah. All right, so now we're going to go up through that outer ring of circles, but we're just going to do one petal at a time. So I went up through that hole, and then I'm going to stitch the petal. So I'm going down through the first hole on this petal, and then I'm going to go up through the second hole on the petal and go back down through that starting point hole. And then I'll go up through the third hole, back down through the starting point, and just continue all around that petal in kind of a fan-like fashion. So up through the fourth hole, back down through the starting point, and that I will continue till I finish this petal. Now when I move on to the next petal, I'm going to go up through that next starting point hole that's at the bottom of that petal. Now these dies press lines into the paper. That's good for 2 things. The first one is that it is a guide to kind of show you where to stitch. And the second thing it's good for is if you decide you don't want to stitch these pieces, you can actually just leave it and it looks like a decorative element. So I like that it serves 2 purposes, because maybe you don't want to spend the time stitching. Now I bet you're wondering, how much time did you spend, Carrie, stitching this? It was a few hours. I don't want to lie to you. It took me some time to stitch this. So there's one flower all the way stitched. Isn't it cool? If you do want to spend the time stitching this, it's one of those things you could like put on a movie and sit down and stitch out this panel. So I'm just going to tie this off in a knot on the back, and then I'll show you how I stitched out the leaf. So here you can see this leaf has a hole in the center. That's your starting point. And then you're just going to go around in a circle, and you'll see the thread start to fan out as you go around. So I went up through the center, down through the outer edge, up through that center starting point, down through the circle on the edge. Now I have some lighter blue thread, almost the same color as my paper really, and I'm using that to do this medium size circle. Again, it has a hole in the middle and then holes around the edge of the flower. So you're going to do the same thing, up through the starting point and down through the circle on the outer edge, just going around in a fan. And also I want you to know that I have taken my thread apart so that I have 3 strands of thread. So when you take a piece of embroidery floss, if you look at it really close, it's about 6 strands of thread. So that would be a little bit too tight to make some of these when you're going back down through the same hole repeatedly. It's going to get really thick in there. So I like to pull my thread apart into half the amount. So I have 3 strands of thread. Also, you can see on the back of this a piece of yellow tape. I used the Spellbinders yellow tape to hold my thread down. It worked pretty good. I used the smallest piece I could make, and that was easy to go through with my needle if I had to, which I did a couple times, and my needle did not get sticky from that. Now the rest of the time I really just tied it off in a knot, but that sometimes was a little bit too small of a knot and it would come through the hole. So I tried to hold it down and stitch over it. So just find the method that works best for you when stitching this. So now this is the tiniest flower. It's just really a circle, like the center of the first flower, and there you can see all the things. There are stems in this as well, which you would just do a straight stitch on that, and there you can see it all stitched out. This is gorgeous, and there was a lot of time and love that went into this, so I'm going to make sure and give it to someone that I know will appreciate the work and the love that went into it. All right, so now what if you don't want to stitch these things? Well, I'm going to do a faux stitching technique here with a fine liner pen, writing right on the cardstock and giving it the look of faux stitching, just tracing from dot to dot. It's pretty easy, and I love the look of it with this black and white. Isn't that cool? So you can do faux stitching. And I'll show you what it looks like without stitching at all at the end of the video. So now I need to stick this down, and I was like, what is the best adhesive to use here? I decided to use glue dots. I already had them out, and then mix that with a little bit of liquid glue. I didn't want too much liquid glue. I didn't want it seeping out through the holes or anything like that, but having the glue dots here and there is like really strong adhesion. That's a hard word, sorry. And the glue is going to really hold it in place. So I put some heavy blocks on that to dry, and you know, who better to give my card to that's going to appreciate the time and the love that went into it but my mom. I'm also using this Glimmer Hot Foil Plate set, the mini everyday sentiments. So I have my machine warming up, and while it's warming, I'm going to use my quick trimmer to cut some foil that's the same size as my light green cardstock. And then I'm going to put my plate and cardstock and foil together. So the foil goes on top of the cardstock, pretty side up, and the plate goes word side down onto that. I'm going to tape it all together, and then once my plate says that it's ready, I'm going to stick that plate side down, turn on my timer, add my plates on top of that. When it's done, I remove that whole platform and run it through my die cut machine. It's going to press that foil into the paper, and it will stay there because of the heat. So now I bring in my new magnetic tool. Isn't this awesome? And then when you want to release it, you press the button. I love that new tool. So now I can take the tape off of the back and lift up my cardstock and leave the hot part down till it cools. Now, when you're die cutting hot foiled things, you want to make sure the tape doesn't touch the foil or it can dull out that Glimmer hot foil. Next, I am gluing on my letters. This is a previous large die of the month set. It's the How Does Your Garden Grow alphabet. It had flowers and stems with it that you could stick right onto the letters, but they also look great by themselves. So I'm going to tuck this in and around my flowers. I did have to trim off part of the letter here so it could fit down in there because it wasn't going past where I had already glued it down. So I like that these letters are kind of peeking out from behind the flowers. And I chose kind of a dark green color that I thought went pretty well with my thread. It doesn't look like it here in the video, but I feel in real life it matches a lot better with that dark green thread. So there's my Forever Grateful Glimmer hot foiled sentiment that I added above the word mom. And now I'm adding some Color Essential Gems. This is the gold mix, and I'm using the shimmery gold ones to match my Aura foil that I use to do my sentiment. I'm gluing that onto an A2 top folding card base, and then I'm going to bring in this flower strip and glue this to the inside of my card for some fun detail on the inside, but I am not going to stitch it. And you can see those lines that the die presses into the paper when you look at the flowers, and it adds that fun detail to the flowers even if you don't stitch it. So that is my card for my mom. I hope that she'll love it. I know she will. She was really into sewing and doing some stitching herself, so I know she'll appreciate it. All right, I thank you so much for stopping by and letting me share the large die of the month from May with you. I will be back again soon with another video, and if you're looking for details on these products, I have it all listed and linked for you below. Happy stamping! Bye!